All right, well, thanks for being here today. We'll go ahead and get going. As I mentioned, this class and Wednesday, we're going to spend like about messages of Revelation for 21st century Christians. And so, just remind a few of these questions that I think Revelation addresses. These aren't the only ones, but as we've gone through the book, I brought these up now and then, but who is Jesus and what is he doing? What are God's purposes? How is God working out these purposes? And is he justified in the way that he's doing that? What's the connection between heaven and earth? What kind of hope and encouragement do we have when we have times of very extreme personal trial or group trial? What challenges does Christ issue to me during these times? And how can I balance my need for grace with a desire for God's justice in dealing with evil? And so this morning, I'm not going to ask us, well, let's answer these specifically. And your comments may or may not relate exactly to these questions. But I think in one way or another, many of us, or the messages for 21st century Christians do fall out of this. I've pulled up some of these images here that I've used throughout the class. There are many others other than these, but you know, the seven churches, the mark that ironically is mentioned even in Ezekiel, that is really just the Hebrew cross is the mark given to these saved 144,000, the souls under the altar, the lion and the lamb, the destruction of the city, the dragon that's chasing the child and then is bound, the scroll that are open, and other visions that just don't fit very well into artistic representation, at least none that I've found. You know, the throne scene of chapter 4 and 5, the scene of 144,000 praising God, and all of these that we see throughout the book, those kinds of things. So all of these images are described and relate to questions that matter to first century Christians, and I think that's why the book was written. But many of these questions, I think that they were addressing in their specific context, in a more general way, relate to questions that I think Christians have in almost any. And as we've noted, this book, while I think in its specifics, like all New Testament books, relate to a particular situation and things going on there, but we use all of these New Testament books to try to draw out implications and messages for us today. And I think Revelation, for us, was written for that purpose. Not, as I've noted, not just so we can know the history of then, or as some kind of detailed roadmap to what's going to happen in 2023, but as motivation as well as instruction as to how to think about our lives, how to think about God. And so I'm going to put this morning the question, as I said was tonight, what messages stand out to you from these images, from the questions that have arisen, from the encouragement or challenges given to these Christians in the first century? What messages stand out to you? And I'll pick on some people if I don't have volunteers. I'll pick on the
One,
people.
okay, one is,
Well, I've got my plan.
for the record, he asks me to talk when that's Here I go. Now, for me, one of the things is sometimes it appears God's silent and evil is winning. And this book shows that's not the case at all, that God hears the prayers of his people and that God is more powerful than the evil that's on this earth, and that that he's won.
So there are probably many ways we can try out of this, Julia. let me ask you, just personally, what kinds of things at times make you feel like, well, Satan is winning?
I think when you see the persecution on the global scale of Christians, you know, while we don't see a lot of direct persecution, severe persecution that, you know, the people in the first century are going to see, but when you hear about that, you know, Nigeria gets more persecution of Christians than all other countries combined, or you hear about the persecution in China and India, and just the horrific things are in the Middle East. It can be a little overwhelming. That plus when you just see the way our culture does seem to be deteriorating rapidly.
Yeah. I mean, I think many of us, it's, you know, you look out, whether narrowly or broadly, like Joey said, Katie, it is easy often to have that feeling of, well, how is this going the way we would expect it to go if Christ is king? I mean, that's a question that these ancestors of the faith of ours 2,000 years ago, if you're sitting in Smyrna or Philadelphia or Pergamum or these places among these seven churches or other locations, what would have been your feeling? Yeah. Not only is Satan seem to be getting the upper hand, but so much so that you think, is this thing that I joined on to, and it's Jesus Christ, is this real? Is it, you know, how can it, when you have a monster like Nero, you can think whatever you want about our current president, the president before that, the president before that, but none of them can even touch the hem of Nero's garment. And the word of his monstrous behavior would have spread wildly. That monster, at the same time, they have Jewish persecutors and Roman persecutors. The feeling would have been one of almost either hopelessness or, as I think is hinted at, a lack, you know, a falling away of faith. You know, that'd be hard not to when you think that these powers, and you see no way out. And so this is a book like another, like Joyce brought it up. What's your sense of, well, let me rather than me, I said, let's go to you guys. So let me let you all follow up. So here, somebody else. What message, maybe following on what Julie was saying, or some other thing that stands out to you?
Well, for me personally, it's such a huge encouragement because, kind of like Paul Harvey, right? We get the rest of the story. We get to take a peek into things that are unseen to us, and it helps put the context around what's happening, whether at that moment with Nero and the things that were to come, but even us now to know that the war is over. God's in control, and we don't have to worry about if we start to endure persecution or some really big problems. We know the outcome. We know the end game, and we know that it's completed.
Let me ask you, Justin, or somebody else want to come on this, follow on it. Then why do we have such a hard time doing that very thing?
Well, it's what we see. It's what we observe now, and sometimes it's hard to maintain that spiritual perspective because we're going through it.
Yeah, you know, I'm jumping a little more field here. I teach MBA classes, and one of the things we go over is you got to understand, yes, there are costs to your business when you write a check, but those costs are obvious. But there are many costs, you know, if you run off customers because of bad service to them or because of other reasons, well, those are costs too, but you're not writing a check to those people. And it's very easy to treat those costs as less significant than, but are those costs any less real? Well, no, they're just as real. And it is easy, I think, to treat the things that you see, well, these are real. The things that I don't see, well, well, yeah, they're real, but not really. I keep using the word real, but to not fully embrace the idea that what is unseen is just as real as what is seen. And that, for me, is challenging.
And maybe more real.
Yeah, in some ways, yeah. This gets to the reality behind the veil. That's the point of Jesus is, or at least one of the points of the rich man and Lazarus, is Jesus saying, here's what you see and the way you think, the way things are. Let me show you how things really are.
And sometimes, to take it like a battle analogy, there were a lot of World War II soldiers who were in losing battles. And they didn't have a concept of this greater war. They just knew the battle that they were in. But if they could step back, which they couldn't, but if they could step back and see, oh wait, VE Day or the Normandy landing was going to be successful, that was very difficult for that person storming that beach at that point in time. And so this is one of those ways in which, you step back and heaven's the control center for Earth, and you see something that you can't see in a particular battle.
I won't say too much, but yeah, I think in war, if you read much about sort of frontline infantry, it's just almost universal. The world begins to narrow down to just me and the people right next to me. And it is very hard to see the bigger picture. And I think maybe in a less extreme way, I think that happens to many of us too. Other messages. Yeah.
For me personally, as a believer, it seems that the bolder that Satan and his minions became in Revelation, God was already bold, and the saints had to respond as bold, if not more boldly than Satan, and look toward the heavens where he is. And that says to me, I don't know what's going to happen with this country. It's never been a perfect country. But I do know that I have to be bolder in my stance for Christ, even look to martyrdom, because I'm beginning to think that if I choose, or any of us chooses not to invite persecution, but like Paul told Timothy, if you're going to live for Christ, you're going to be persecuted. And so if I'm trying to live more boldly, not in an obnoxious way, that's just going to invite it, because that's the team that I'm on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I appreciate what you said about not inviting, persecution. We're not masochists, and we're not, obnoxious. And I think sometimes we take the phraseology of Galatians about the putting on the armor, and we begin to think about battling in an aggressive way, and I don't think that's what you're saying. But I think the idea is, look, we don't back away from our faith. We don't back down from our belief. And our expression of this to the world is through character and through love and submission. He's not saying, hey, you all go to the chief magistrate of your city or the procurator and wag your finger in his face and say, you're going to hell. And that's not the point. But it is a point of when you're pulled in before them and they say, are you a Christian? Do you believe this? You say, well, yes, I do. And like Polycarp said to his executors, he has it, I've lived for him now. I've lived now something like 85 years, and he hasn't forsaken me. How can I forsake him now? And, you know, that, what was the effect of that sort of approach of these ancestors of ours of faith? What happened in the first, second, and third centuries?
Christianity exploded.
Right. It went from a few thousand people to tens of thousands of people to then millions of people. And what happened to the persecution? Well, it intensified as that world was threatened, but eventually they became Christians, right? And you know, I knew some problems that emerged, but yeah, I think having, yeah, and I would tie this to Justin's point, having a sense, or I don't know who said this, somebody else said, but having a sense of being part of something bigger than yourself. That I think seeing your life, and this is difficult, isn't it? If your life is taking care of your kids at home, if your life is showing up for the same job every day, if your life seems pretty small in its impact, it's very easy to think of yourself as disconnected from, but it seems like the point of this book is no matter where you think you are, if you're living in Smyrna or Philadelphia or wherever, you're part of this big battle. And there is evil. And even people who aren't intentionally siding on to follow Satan may be doing so. And the question is, well, who am I going to ally with? All right, well, I mean, I think I'm dominate here. Others are all very useful.
I think we're coming closer to being persecuted like the old Christians were in the early times because of what the government's doing to us now, taking away a lot of the rights, and a lot of the stuff they're doing with the schools, a lot of stuff that they're doing with the churches. You know, the Catholic Church, look what they're doing with the Catholic Church and stuff. So it's not going to be long. I think we're going to be persecuted just like the early Christians were.
Yeah, and that may be, I mean, I certainly, it's hard to know, you know, the paths and trends are not favorable. But on this, I do encourage us as citizens of a place where we still have a ton of freedom to be cautious of, because not only I think it causes stress and anxiety for us, but in some ways it's disrespectful to people living in places like China and Nigeria, who it's not a matter of, well, this may end up there. They are being, and family members are being jailed, and in some places like Nigeria, people killed because of their faith. And in these ancestors of ours, this wasn't just a matter of, well, you know, there looked to be headwinds. And we have, Julie and I have a friend that live down in where my parents live, and both of them have some very wise insights. And the wife, she said, often we're troubled because our knowledge so extends beyond our reach. And what she meant by that is we know about so many more things than we can directly influence. Look, it's not good that someplace, you know, I'll pick out Oregon. You know, there's something, you know, you can read something in the news that's happening in Oregon or California, and go, man, that is terrible. But if I ask myself, in terms of me, what, you know, yeah, during my career at WKU, you know, were there a few people now and then who rolled their eyes at me or maybe had a kind of derogatory view or statement? Yeah. But have I really been restrained? And if we were living 100 or years ago, would I even know about this event over here that's got me so worked up? Now, yeah, we live in the world we live in. We know about these events. It may bother us, but I think it is easy to build them into almost a view that I'm being hemmed in and persecuted. Now, yeah, I don't know, 10 years from now, 20 years, I do not know where things will be. But I would encourage us to be cautious of taking things that are, in many ways, are really remote from us and turning it in, pray for those people, hoping that that situation improves, but at the same time, not turning that into a personal event for myself. You see what I'm getting at here? Kim, did you have
I was wondering, why do you think that maybe we don't get the types of persecution that maybe we could get, aside of our freedom? Seems like since we have the freedom to speak, the freedoms that we have to go on the internet to a degree and speak about Jesus, why do you think it is that it's so calm here for us? And I also think that there are more persecuted Christians in this country than we're allowed to hear about.
Maybe. Again, I think these things ebb and flow through the centuries. Things, I'll talk some ways tonight, but you have this build-up and this book about these persecuted powers that have really gained the upper hand and now are going to be put down. And even if that was just for a decade, Christians in the 70s and 80s were not persecuted the way they have been. And so that would have felt like an enormous relief for them. Again, for us, we got to press all of these decades together, but going from a world where Roman and Jewish persecutors were just on them constantly to now that being lifted, I think many of them would have felt like, hey, the very things he's talking about, that Christ reigning, this is coming. But then it came back in the 90s and all. I do resist the idea that, well, if we're really doing it right, we're going to suffer. No, I don't think that's, that again, there's an ebb and a flow, and living, Paul writing Timothy tells him to tell what to Christians, pray that you can live quiet lives and you can practice your faith and share your faith with others. I mean, that's one of the things, when in comparing these things, and one of the reasons I caution us not to get overly dramatic about the situation in our country, because again, a place like China now, there's even beginning to build up. You cannot teach your children these things, and you should not. Well, nobody's. I'm not saying that won't be the case in the U.S., but that's not the case in the U.S. And it's not even close to that. And people are being put in, or if you're living, or Christians in many places that have lived for centuries in Muslim-dominant countries, even though it's tolerant of them, or, right, you can practice your faith, but you cannot proselytize. You cannot go out and be teaching your neighbors. That's a criminal offense, right? Again, that's not anywhere near where we are in the U.S., right?
Well, one thing I think about that is that, as even happen in America or anywhere else, is God's still in control of how much he lets the devil do or not do. And you see in this book that he limited the devil from persecuting them at certain points in time. We see that even with Job, right? He wanted to do more to Job, but God says, no, this is all you're allowed to do. So we got to remember that God, this book shows us, God's in control of the devil also. And he only lets him do so much. Not more than we can handle.
That's a much more succinct answer to Kim's questions than my question and my was. But yeah, I think that's exactly one of the important messages of this book, that ultimately we really aren't in control of how pervasive and invasive evil is. That we are a role play in this, and Kim encouraging us, how we react to the evil that emerges around us. But yet that's on a scale, scope, and level that, as this book notes, is playing out on a dimension and scale that, does he ever really tell these Christians in this book, now here's how you rope in Satan and these powers? No, he just tells them you need to patiently endure, and God is working out these things.
For me, it's more of a message of perseverance that I see. For me personally, as a child growing up, I can look back now and see where maybe I wasn't attacked for my Christianity, but I was attacked by Satan via worldly things, people that came into my life that were abusive, things like that, made it very difficult along the path. And I think, he says in chapter 3, see, I have set before you an open door and no one can shut it. For you have a little strength and have kept my word and have not denied my name. I think that we can persevere. I look at the older people in our congregation and I think they have made it. And that is a real inspiration for me. And we have to persevere for our children and for our grandchildren. So it's just more of an inspiration for me, and how it talks about the sea of glass all through the Bible, and we see in Revelation, at the end there is no more sea, there is no more separation, and there's a new Jerusalem, and that's so hopeful.
I'm going to riff off of your point a little here, and that, I think for most of us in terms of our personal lives, very few of us in here truly suffer because being a Christian. And sometimes I think, we lose track of the side fact that there are people in places like Nigeria, China, and Iraq, and other places that are truly suffering because they're Christian. And it's one of the reasons I haven't said this as much this go around, but 4 years ago, I think one of the important messages of this book for people like us who aren't suffering because we're Christian is to realize, well, that doesn't mean we still don't suffer and we don't have troubles. Look, there are people in this room that, whether it's family members or friends, have lost little babies, have lost spouses, have lost relationships. Those things are incredibly troubling and can be devastating. And I think this book, again, this is sort of taking it a little bit farther than it directly takes itself. But I think this book, as Ryan is getting at, is a message for us in any kind of troubling situation. One of the reasons early on when we were doing the intro, I mentioned, yes, as persecution in certain countries began to diminish by the 4th century, does that mean people in these countries began to live lives just like they were living in the Garden of Eden? And it's one of the reasons I mentioned things like, that are just sort of historical footnotes to us, but the Black Plague that came in waves really from the 1300s on to 1600s, 1700s, but some of the biggest effects were, say, in the 1300s in Europe. Well, if you're living in a world where 1/3 to 1/2 of people are dying from this disease, what would be your sense of the world? It is caving in. Evil forces are winning, not because they're persecuting me, but because of disease and destruction. And I've mentioned there are many Christians done many good things in visiting poor countries and trying to help people, but many Christians who have gone to these places have found themselves, their faith challenged. They go to Haiti, they go to Guatemala, and they see, how in the world could this be going on if God is in control? Well, I think this book it speaks to us in our lives. And, you know, when we're young, you know, obstacles, now I look back and I said it's not such a big deal, but Julie's talked about over the years. She went, I don't know, what age were you when your front teeth got knocked out?
In 6th grade.
Yeah, yeah. So you can imagine a 6th grade girl. Berta and Melda were great parents, but I don't know what they were thinking on this. They just gave her
I
silk?
had stainless steel front teeth through puberty.
Yeah, so, I mean, we can laugh about that now, but I didn't have anything like that bad, but my front two teeth would come out, and finally they pulled them, thinking, well, that will help, but still my permanent teeth wouldn't come in. They eventually x-rayed it, but there's like a 2-year process figuring out I had obstruction there, and they had to do work surgery. Well, yeah, I went through 2 years of not having stainless steel teeth, but of having no teeth. At an age of like 10, 11, at ages that, you know, you're gonna get ridiculed, you know, and also I've had a couple lazy eye. I remember walking down, there was a stretch between like a PE building and the main building, I don't know, 5th, 6th grade, and 2 or 3 girls were walking the other way. This was sort of in between, or nobody else was out there. And they're looking at me, just, you know, laughing and making fun. I'm thinking, man, you know, this is not a good day. But the very fact that that would stick with me 50-something years later, you know, it shows, you know, and I use those just as examples of, you know, at different ages, the obstacles that we face. And the bad things that come to us in this life, or people that we love and care about a lot, you know, those are not always being dragged out of your home and put into prison. We're not, because you're a Christian, I mean, you know, we're not facing that sort of thing. And in many ways, I think most of the obstacles and challenges we face in our faith in a place like the U.S. are currently, at least, not about persecution, but about these sorts of things that bring us down, that make us question, even if we don't express it, but why does this come our way? You know, why, you know, I look out there and I see faces, I don't want to personalize this too much, but see faces of people that I know are going, I don't know exactly how you're thinking about it, but I know we're going through things that are really challenging and difficult. And I think Revelation is a place that we can go to find hope and comfort. Because all of this, all the troubles and sickness and disease ultimately isn't because of our sin, but is because of sin and evil that has come into the world and messed up the world that was created. Boy.
I think one of the ways that the book of Revelation perhaps helps a lot is well-timed, I think, for the occasion, and is timeless, is the sense of identity that Christians get. Of course, we have Christ, you know, he's not the defeated guy that the Romans nailed to a cross and put in the tomb, and those same guys are going to destroy Jerusalem and the temple. You know, it's like they need to see Christ in his glorified state, certainly, and see him as he is. But it also helps us see Christians as we should see ourselves. And I think this dates all the way back really to Matthew 23 when Jesus tells the scribes and the Pharisees, your house is left to you desolate. And beginning at 24, the disciples are afraid to ask, I think. They're saying, hey, look at all these beautiful buildings, you know, that associated with the temple, as if to say, you know, you wouldn't destroy your own house, would you? And Jesus makes it abundantly clear, you know, that will be all of Matthew 24 is the destruction of Jerusalem. But the Jews would have this identity crisis without that temple, right? It was who they were. It was what they were all about. And many of the Christians were Jews, right, who'd become Christians. And what's going to happen when the same guys who killed Jesus and nailed him to a cross destroy Jerusalem and the temple? And this is why I think it's well-timed if the early date is correct, because the late date would just be too late to solve this problem, right? To have all this information coming a decade, a generation after these people are dead, it just wouldn't be fitting, you know, to have that, because all this talk about the New Jerusalem and what it is. And it's like I want to think about Revelation 3:12, where Jesus is saying, blessed are those who overcome. You'll be a pillar in the temple of my God, and I'll write on you the name of my God, and the name of the New Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven, and my own name. And then we get to Revelation 21, and we're looking at the temple, and John's like, I didn't see a temple. But wait a minute, Jesus said, you're going to be a pillar in the temple. And at first John says, I didn't see a temple. And then he says, wait a minute, God Almighty and the Lamb are the temple. Now, connect that back to chapter 3 again. He says, you're going to be a pillar in that temple. And my name's written on you, name of God's written on you. You understand the new name that somebody gets when they leave their household and join another, a bride leaves her family and joins another family and gets the name of her husband, right? And this is what's going on, I think, in Revelation 3:12. And then we see, the beauty about this is that we are one with God forever. Part of that, we are the temple. It's not we're going to walk into the temple and be there. It's like we are the temple, that identity.
Yeah. Lawrence and Seth King and somebody else, I can't remember right now. Joshua. Yeah. We're teaching Hebrews last summer. And in many ways, it's, I think, pushing toward the same thing and responding to the same challenges, but using a different pathway. And Lawrence got to the end, and he was talking about, and he may have even used this in his sermon, about big priest and what this means and for us. And afterward, he was like, that kind of fell flat. And we were talking about it, and we were just saying, look, academically, we understand, okay, we're priests. But we don't feel that at sort of a visceral level. To say, oh, the temple is gone, okay, to us, Gentiles, 2,000 years later, well, yeah, temple's gone, see, this whole new era. But I think, boy, the point it's making, this was their identity. The high priest, the temple, Jerusalem, and even for Gentile Christians, seeing this as the center of where this is all growing out of. I think, but the point you make is a good one too, Floyd. I think over my lifetime and many of your lifetimes, this idea that your identity, how you think of yourself, really has an influence on how you feel about yourself and how you act. And in some ways, we've sort of built that into, therefore, you should feel, whatever you choose your identity, you should feel great. Well, okay, well, that's getting off the being. And your point is, and I think this point for Christians here, you've got an identity, embrace that. Who are we? What, between Revelation and Hebrews and other New Testament passages, who are we? Well, we're priests, but again, to Gentiles, 2,000 years old, we're priests, okay? But, what is a priest? And this is what Lawrence are saying. We probably instead of just saying we're priests, describe more what was the role of, what was being a priest? What identity did you really take on?
Intercessor.
Right, you're an intercessor. You could approach the holy place. You could handle the sacred objects.
I read a book to the boys, and it's talking about how, like, the overarching theme of everything is there's just sin. It came in with the garden, and with the temple, it was only the high priest that got to go into the most holy place. And when all of that changed and Jesus came, now we get to go to God ourselves every single day. We are our own priests.
We get to come. This state of Revelation and in Hebrews, I'm talking tonight, this idea that there's no temple God and the Son or the temple, the idea that we can come into the very presence of God. Again, we sort of take that as, well, yeah. But I think for Jewish believers, that would have been an idea. I can go into the most holy place. I can go into the very presence that only the high priest could go into. Think of yourself in that sense as an incredibly privileged person. That's what it means to be a priest. And go ahead, John.
And one step further, the high priest and Moses himself couldn't see the face of God, but we as priests will.
Yeah, no, right, that's sort of what we have now and what we will have. Thank you very much for your input. We'll pick up on this Wednesday.